Only Jesus can set people free from sexual confusion. Welcome to Freedom Alive. For many years, Ann Edwards struggled with same-sex attraction, but then Jesus set her free. Now she's helping others find that same freedom through her organization, Restored Hope Network. Ann joins us to share her story and share how a U.S. Supreme Court decision is changing the landscape in Colorado to help more people. I'm blessed to again be joined by my friend and co-host Matt Staver from Liberty Counsel. And Matt, it's always encouraging when we get to hear a changed life story of someone who was entangled in sexual confusion.
Yes, we've had on this program, Freedom Alive, several testimonies to that effect of people who were involved in same-sex attractions, behavior, or gender confusion. They wanted to identify as something other than how God created them. And when they gave their life to the Lord, they have been dramatically changed. Ann is one of those. And not only has she been changed, but she is there to provide help and resources for others who, like her, was struggling or are struggling with these kinds of attractions. And then we're going to talk about an amazing case, 8-1 decision from the United States Supreme Court that freed up counselors to be able to help people struggling. Up until now, they've been basically sidelined. They've been throttled in Colorado and in about half of the states because of these laws that ban Christian counseling, designed to trap people in the sin of sexual sin and not allow them this ability to escape and not allow them the freedom. This is a great development we're going to talk about with Ann today.
No question. If you think about it, so many episodes that we've done hinge and really trigger around Genesis 50:20, right?
Yeah.
I mean, and this is another one that we're going to share today.
What God, what was intended for evil or to harm you, God can turn around for good. And that's exactly Ann's story.
No question. No question. This is an amazing story. We cannot wait to bring it to you. But Liberty Counsel's Freedom Alert is next.
Idaho law removes LGBTQ pride flag from state buildings. Governor Brad Little recently signed a law that only allows municipalities to fly flags that are on the state's approved list. As a result, the city of Boise had to remove the rainbow pride flag from its city hall. Last year, the Idaho legislature passed a law that banned non-official flags from state and municipal buildings. However, the Boise City Council then passed a resolution making the pride flag an official flag. Now the current law only allows state governments to fly a limited option of flags, including the American flag, state flags, official military flags, the POW MIA flag, and other national and international flags on special occasions. And there's a penalty of $2,000 per flag for each day a non-official flag is flown.
Up next, Matt's interview with Ann Edward.
It's my pleasure to welcome to Freedom Alive a very special guest and a longtime friend, Ann Edward. She is the founder and executive director of Restored Hope Network. Welcome to Freedom Alive, Ann.
Thank you so much, Matt. Thanks for having me.
And tell us, to get the viewers some background about you and then also Restored Hope Network. First of all, Restored Hope Network, what does it do? What's the ministry of Restored Hope Network?
Great question. We're a coalition of ministries across the U.S. who help people who want to leave LGBT to align with their faith, their values, their conscience. And we also help families who are grappling with how to love well without compromising their faith. Someone in their family who is LGBT identified.
So you have been in this ministry for a long time, and you're one of the very strong voices in this ministry. But how did you start the ministry? How did you get involved in this? Tell us your personal background, because you have personal experience with struggling with some of these issues. Now you're helping people come out of the struggle and get the freedom that you now experience.
That is true, Matt. I came out of homosexuality myself. At 19, I embraced a gay identity. I had struggled with it for many years because of molestation when I was 3.5. that occurred over a period of time. Really, the outcome in my life was a detachment from my femininity. And then later on, that became an attraction to other girls to kind of try to fill the gap that was in my soul. I didn't understand any of that. I just experienced the feelings until later. Later in 19 years old, Jesus entered the picture. Mm-hmm. And instead of my boundarylessness away at college, and really depression as well that went with that, no boundaries meant no value, essentially. And I had dreams about Jesus, not unlike what happens in Iran. There I was on a pretty secular college that was a party school, and God was trying to capture my attention. And as that began to happen, I did pray, I just want to know love. And whoever the true God is, I want to know who that is. And so over time, he began to reveal himself to me. And the clincher for me was one night I was at a Baptist student union. We were praying. It was the end of a series of teachings that we went through deep theological questions like, why is there evil in the world? And if God is good, etc. And as we were praying, I realized that there was somebody incredible in the room, somebody I couldn't see, but who was full of kindness and authority. And I knew I had to have that person in my life, and I knew he wasn't yet in my life. And so I told the pastor that night, I said, hey, my dream is to marry a woman and have that commitment for my life. And then he very gently shared with me that God's perspective on sexuality and gender is that that is considered sin. It's outside of God's plan. And he explained to me why and all the rest. And that was so powerful, and yet rarely happens this day.
Tell me, in your experience, and it's a tragedy where at 3.5, you said you began to get sexually molested by someone, and that continued on for a while. In your experience, some of the things that you experienced, particularly with boys or girls, men or women, what is the typical thing that you have seen, or something that's generally consistent in most of these situations where somebody has these same-sex attractions or gender confusion?
It's fairly common that there's childhood sexual abuse underlying much of this. It may play out differently, and certainly everyone who has childhood sexual abuse doesn't end up in homosexuality. That's clear. But 7 out of 10 of the women of my survey, and there were 256 that filled it out, 7 out of 10 had experienced childhood sexual abuse. And that really tainted their sense of value, their sense of integrity as a child, their sense of vulnerability, their sense of value. It just hits all those things. Safety is a really important aspect of childhood. Growing up, feeling safe really enables us to grow up into healthy, holy, and whole adults. Unfortunately, many things go to mar that image, and that's one of them. Another one is if a child is imitating, say a boy is more imitating his mother because he feels more connected there than his father, or the father's missing, it's very likely there's going to be peer pressure and name calling of that child in school. And that kind of information, calling someone gay when they're very young, kids don't know what that means. They don't have sexual feelings towards the same sex at that age. They just wonder, okay, well, what do these peers see in me that I don't see in myself? And then it opens up Pandora's box for these kids. Instead of having an adult male, one of the family members, come alongside and help the little boy feel like a boy, feel accepted as a boy, and learn how to become that boy that he wants to be. And so underlying much of this as an adult is the craving to fill in a gap that was left in the soul where a person does not feel good about being a male or a female. They don't feel adequate, and they're trying to grasp that the wrong way by having sex with somebody of the same sex. And so there's a really strong dynamic happening underneath. Now that's common. It doesn't mean it's every situation, but it's very common. And the way people get to that craving, that desire, that emotional longing to bond in such an intimate way with someone of the same sex there are a plethora of ways to get there. But if eventually the outcome is generally, I don't feel good about myself as a male or as a female. And I'm trying to gain that by having sex with somebody else of the same sex. And that just doesn't work. Mm. It's like drilling holes in a cup. It's not going to hold the water. So God knows better, and he has better intention for us.
Now, you gave your life to the Lord Jesus Christ, and what happened? How did you go through this change? Did you have counseling? What was the process that you went through?
Absolutely. I had counseling. Some of it was helpful. Some of it wasn't helpful. A lot of it was helpful. Right off the bat, though, after I became a believer and committed my life to Jesus, I went to a counselor who was very knowledgeable in the UC Santa Barbara area, which is where I was going to school, University of California, Santa Barbara. And the counselor had a lot of knowledge, but I wasn't ready for it. So I just needed to get grounded in Jesus and walking securely. I wasn't struggling a whole lot. So honestly, he was sharing with me that my molestation had some impact on the outcome of my struggle. And I thought, well, I hear you, but I can't put the emotional pieces together. It doesn't make sense to me. I wasn't ready for it. But a couple of years later, I was ready to begin dealing with those things. I got counseling from a female counselor that helped a great deal. And then I really got help from a Christian ministry north of San Francisco. I had floundered in my walk with Jesus about 5 years in. I ended up stepping through doors I shouldn't have and really floundered in walking with Jesus. I had sex with another woman, and that was not delightful. It reignited the old longings, and like drilling holes in the cup, it simply evaporated my sense of integrity, etc. And so eventually I called out to God, and he intervened by giving me another ministry and an opportunity to confess, confide, and get the whole thing out so that I could have a renewed life in Jesus. And it was at that point, Matt, I was really ready to work through issues. I was humble, I was teachable, I was interested. And at that point, the Lord really began to work in me. He also asked me to forgive the fellow who had violated me when I was 3, and that was really difficult. Mm. And not just forgive in writing, like a lawyer would sign a paper or the legislature or the president would sign a paper, rather forgive from the heart. And I felt him calling me to do that because that led to my sense of fear about being a secure woman. I just wasn't very secure. And it all went back to that in my life. And so I remember him impressing that on my soul during a Bible study, that you need to forgive that person from your heart. And I remember thinking, well, I can't produce feelings, so you're going to have to do it in me. And somehow that was just the right thing to say to the Lord. And so a couple of weeks later, this individual who had kind of external relationship with me and my family, he reached out to me. And I remember, instead of feeling fear, anxiety, anger, hatred, any of those things, I felt joy. And I just laughed and said, Lord, you did it. You did it in my soul. Thank you so much. And it was actually from that point that I began to trust other individuals who were men and began to feel comfortable in my own skin and enjoy being a woman. I was a woman amongst other women, and that desexualizes them.
Oh, that's amazing.
They were no longer objects.
Yeah. So
that began my pathway forward, but it wasn't over a day or two. It wasn't a half a year. It wasn't a few months. It was a good 6-7 years that God had to walk me through steps that would give me better grounding as a human being on the face of the earth. And I'm so grateful he did. I would never be a grandmother today. And having been a wife and a mom to 3 sons, one of whom is now married, and I have a 9-month-old grandbaby, and I am thrilled beyond thrill.
That's amazing how God can restore the broken pieces and put every one of us back together again. I want to talk to you about the importance of counseling. California was the first state in the nation to ban counseling for people who want to overcome same-sex attractions, behaviors, or gender confusion. And that began in 2012. I know Liberty Counsel, we litigated that, went up to the Supreme Court, lost. Then New Jersey was the second state, same thing, virtually identical law. We litigated that, went to the Supreme Court, lost. And then that particular decision from California was used later by California to restrict crisis pregnancy centers and force them to provide information about low-cost and free abortions to people who were coming to the crisis pregnancy center. And they relied upon the case of Pickup versus Brown. You know David Pickup, of course. Yes. And then that went to the U.S. Supreme Court in 2015. The Supreme Court said, no, that violates the First Amendment, and set aside those two cases from California and New Jersey. Cases still went on. Make a long story short, we ended up winning a case in Florida, 2 cases. And then eventually a case just happened at the United States Supreme Court, 2026, reaching the High Court from Colorado in an 8-1 decision. The United States Supreme Court said that these bans on counseling are unconstitutional. They violate the First Amendment. And now counselors and clients that need this help, like you need, are freed all over the United States, all over the country. Tell us about the importance of this case, the counseling that is so necessary, that we see restricted in about half the states, about 87 total jurisdictions when you add cities and counties, still in existence with those laws as of the Supreme Court's recent 8-1 decision striking the laws down.
It is so important. There was a very much forced speech in the case of NIFLA, which is the case you're referencing about forcing speech on the back of a door of a pregnancy resource center. And that's viewpoint discrimination. Clearly, it's forced speech. Can the government compel speech or limit a person's ability to speech? And so that question is what came up to the U.S. Supreme Court, as you are very clearly articulating. How can the government prohibit speech, one viewpoint over another? Is it to judge between the client and clinician what can be spoken in the context of counseling? And honestly, that kind of care is so important because it unearths some of the difficulties that lead people into homosexuality and help them recover their identity in Christ. What we found, too, is that the data shows that if someone is able to get the care that they seek and leaving homosexuality, it reduces their suicidality for minors in half. That's huge. You're saving many lives as a result. For adults, it reduces the suicidality 17 to 23 times. Now, that data comes from the Generation Study, which is based out of a gay lobby group that gained a lot of information out of the UCLA Williams Institute group. So that's a gay lobby group the data came from that shows that suicidality is reduced if a person is able to get the counseling that they seek to leave homosexuality. And what are we talking about here? We're not talking about abusive practices. We're talking about speech. We're talking about speech in the context of counseling, but that also has a chilling effect to the church. Otherwise, within a ministry setting, within a pastoral setting, if a person is prevented from talking about leaving homosexuality and aligning with God's design and their physical bodies, that limits conversations, even with pastors, counselors, strangers on the street, families. And we know the outcome that they're seeking is more like what Canada has instituted, which is prohibiting a form of speech and shutting it down and giving no option, so that we leave people in suicidal condition without getting the support that they actually seek. It's them seeking it. Why should they not be allowed to have that counseling?
Yeah, this is really these laws that started in California, and they went to almost half the states. And total now, we struck down 23 of them with the Otto case out of Florida. But now there's still 87 that were still on the books up until this decision. They basically tell a client that your GPS can only go one way. You can program in where you want to go, but the GPS will never take you there. It'll never take you to freedom from unwanted same-sex attractions, behaviors, or identity confusion. It'll only affirm you against that which you don't want to be affirmed. You don't want to identify as homosexual. You don't want to be confused about how God created you. You want to overcome that. And these laws basically intrude the government into this private counseling censor, and the government then censors what the counselor can say and what the client can ask. It's unbelievable. So thankfully they're struck down. But I want to ask you something else about beyond those particular counseling laws and the importance of why pastors should address this issue, because sometimes pastors say, well, this is controversial. I don't want to come across like I'm hateful. I just want to share the gospel. And on the other hand, I say, if you are silent on this issue and you don't know what's behind this issue, which is dynamically at its core a spiritual attack on God who created us in his image. It's ultimately an attack on God himself. And you remain silent, you're going to have people like Anne, like you, in the congregation, maybe in the congregation, or somebody that somebody knows like you, used to be, and you'll never get the help that you need. Talk to us about why pastors and churches ought to be involved in the healing ministry, speaking the truth.
Absolutely. If you think that God's design for sexuality and gender doesn't matter, then you've missed a huge point, because it's all the way from the beginning to the end. Marriage is discussed, as well as God made them male and female. These are huge topics. These aren't irrelevant to the church. They're very important. Our well-being, if someone's at war with their own body, for example, that leads to, psychological issues, even untreated psychological issues that they come into it with. So if we're leaving people to self-destruct, essentially, be at war with their own bodies, then we are leaving them in grave danger. The fact that men who are taking estrogen are more likely to be suicidal or die from stroke, that's huge. Do we not care about those? And I think it's worth risking it to talk about God's good design for sexuality and gender, his compelling design that he actually uses in relationship with the church, Jesus, the husband, the bridegroom, and the church, the bride. These are not insignificant topics. These are hugely significant. And most pastors will talk about God's design at a wedding ceremony. Why not in the church itself? And then if you take a beautiful design or painting like the Mona Lisa or the amazing artwork in Venice, and you start scribbling on top of that graffiti, and you're defacing this amazing artwork, isn't it important to limit one's ability to do that and to say, hey, that's not a good idea. Let's not draw on top of it with crayons. Essentially, that's what we're doing with sin. We're pulling in and drawing on top of God's incredible artwork, the very growing, moving, changing moment by moment, not just a sunset or a sunrise, which are amazing, but the design of a human being over a lifetime, from vulnerability as an infant all the way to getting older and going through the marriage stages. Shouldn't we have a guidebook for that? And don't we already have that? We have the scripture. Isn't it important to guide our youth with godly identity issues and coach them through it? They're getting a lot of messaging. Even kids that don't deal with this naturally or natively from the brokenness of their young lives are now facing topics about LGBT every day in school, mostly around the country.
You're right. The whole LGBTQ issue, that you're born in the wrong body and we're going to fix it, that really is a rebellion against God, saying that God made a mistake and we're going to create ourselves in our own image. And that's ultimately at its core, the rebellion against God. You have a book called Restoring Sexual Identity, Hope for Women Who Struggle with Same-Sex Attraction. Well, Ann Edward, the founder and executive director of Restored Hope Network, such an amazing story of transformation where you had a dream of Jesus, you gave your life to Jesus, and through help of others, you are free. Now you have children, even a grandchild. Congratulations as a grandmother.
Thank you.
So amazing things that God can do with broken people. And he's in the business of taking the broken lamp and putting it back together again. Your ministry name, Restored Hope, is really powerful. And you can go to restoredhopenetwork.org. One of the books, and among many resources there, is Restoring Sexual Identity, Hope for Women Who Struggle with Same-Sex Attraction. Ann Edward, thank you for joining us on Freedom Alive.
Thank you so much, Matt. A privilege to be with you.
Matt, against such a chaotic, confusing background, it's encouraging to hear Ann say that there is so much hope, so much help, so many incredible resources for so many people that need help with this.
I think that's very important for parents who have children or maybe grandchildren who go the wrong way and are struggling with these same things that Ann struggled with, maybe in different ways. And Ann is a clear example of there's hope. In fact, we've had many people like Ann on this program, on Freedom Alive, that have gone through the same thing. In fact, we even had Walt Heyer, who went through the surgeries, and he wanted to identify as a woman. And he's been married for many years. Now he's got a great ministry to people who are going through this kind of same struggle that he went through. And like Ann, Walt also came to the Lord. And like Ann, Walt also went through a series of counseling. Which is why it's so good that this decision, the Childs versus Salazar decision at the United States Supreme Court, in an 8-1 decision in 2026, found that these laws banning Christian counseling that help people overcome these struggles and this gender confusion are unconstitutional. And now we have to make sure that all of these laws that are on the books are taken down and that they comply with the United States Supreme Court decision.
For those of you at home, with every episode of Freedom Alive, it's our privilege to bring you hope, peace, light, and truth against so many issues, especially this one today with Ann and Matt and all the great work that Liberty Counsel has done in this space. If you or someone in your family or someone that you know is struggling with this, know that there is hope, there is help, there are resources. Don't ever, 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 ever give up. God is in the transformation business and He loves you. In closing, remember Galatians 5 verse 1, which says it was for freedom that Christ set us free. Therefore, keep standing firm and do not be subject again to a yoke of slavery. Our freedom is a gift from our Creator. We must never forget that and always protect it. Join us here next time. You'll hear victories as well as ways you can stand up for your priceless freedom. Join us again for Freedom Alive.